Joining us, founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America and host of the Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rieckhoff. David French is still with us, too. So, Paul, let's start with this Bondi news. Look, this is, of course, for many people, largely about Epstein. And it's an interesting sort of area because when you look at the recent polling, a lot of the moderate support and young male support that the president has been losing, they're kind of the exact demographics and groups of people who at one point had a lot of hope in this particular investigation, who at least said they cared deeply about harming children, justice for women who had been abused. And now they've watched the last year unfold and they have been very clear on their podcasts and elsewhere about their frustrations. So I'm curious how you read the tea leaves today with her firing.
I think a lot of people are done. And I think Trump's hearing that, and he's seeing it, and he's feeling it, especially from his base. Sean Ryan, the influential Navy SEAL podcaster, said, he's done. He said, I'm over it. I'm tired of the lies. Don't come knocking on my door. Don't come asking for my help. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And it's really a triad. It's Epstein. It's the terribly unpopular situation with ICE, and now it's the Iran war. And those three things are now coming together with gas prices in a spike that's directly aligned at Trump. And I think he wants to stop the bleeding. He wants to change the narrative. He wants to get rid of Pam Bondi. But the problem with the Trump administration is if you remove her, it's just another person coming in her place. It's just like removing Kristi Noem and putting in Markwayne Mullin, or removing the Ayatollah and putting in his son. I mean, it's the same kind of regime. It's going to be another loyalist. And at its very base, until there's accountability for Epstein, it's not going to move. I have Ro Khanna on my show today, and I asked him, what's the plan? How do you move this forward? I think he and Tom Massey have been very smart and strategic in assembling a bipartisan coalition that's not going to let this go, and Trump wants to try to move on to other things.
Yeah, and I mean, Todd Blanche, and I assume that's who you're kind of referencing with your Ayatollah comparison there, because for many of the survivors, he is sort of, in some cases, they're angrier at him than her, because he is the guy who flew down, met with Ghislaine Maxwell, and then moved her into cushier digs. David, I'm curious how you see, many lawmakers like Congressman Raskin or Senator John Ossoff, they've been using this term, the Epstein class, to describe not just the crisis and the anger that the survivors feel over the knowledge, the understanding that there are still tons of people out there with knowledge of what happened here, with connections to this, who have not been held accountable, but sort of to tell a larger story about the haves and have-nots, the people who do face justice and accountability in this country, and then the people who just seem to, time and time again, get off scot-free. And how do you see that story of the Epstein class, I guess, colliding with the financial bread and butter pressures that Americans are feeling every single day?
Well, I think the thing that's shocking to at least some people in MAGA is to find out that the Epstein class includes their favorite president, Donald Trump. And that realization, I think one thing that's happening is a lot of people are looking at the wrong metric. They're looking at the percentage of MAGA people who are supporting Donald Trump. And that's, if you're going to identify yourself as currently MAGA, you're supporting Donald Trump. But he's got the unwavering loyalty of a diminishing base. So they're still with them, but there's just fewer of them. And I think all of this is working together. It's not any one thing. So I think if there was a problem with the current problem with the Epstein files, but there was no war in Iran, we weren't seeing the kind of chaos in the streets like we saw in Minneapolis, that if we were in a different situation, that you could overcome any one of these things, or maybe any two of these things if you're Trump. But overcoming all of it, it's all working together to tell a lot of people, and I'm very glad you brought up these podcasters, because I think that's an underappreciated element of this. It's not that they control millions of voters, but they are a leading edge indicator that a lot of the people who came to Trump recently, who haven't been with him for 10 years, they came to him because they believed they had an independent mindset and that the left was too intolerant and narrow, right? Well, then they're still keeping their independent mindset, and they're looking at Trump and saying, you're not delivering. They're not invertebrates and sycophants like the Republican members of Congress or his cabinet. And if Trump isn't delivering for them, they're a leading edge indicator that other people who are more recent into the Trump coalition, it's sort of last in, first out. And a lot of the more recent converts to Trumpism have now bailed on him completely. That's why you're seeing in some polling averages, he's now below that very dreaded 40% line in overall approval. So It's a loyal base, but it's a shrinking base. And all of this is working together.
Paul, how do you read that specific group, the first in, last out, I guess, group, or the last in, first out group? Because I know that you have conversations with people. You, of course, have been watching and analyzing this war. I'm sure you listened to the president's speech last night. You know, when you hear from the president and he's asked about Iran, it seems that his aides are putting in front of him polling that suggests that, like, MAGA is with him, gung-ho. But a YouGov, an economist poll that recently came out, found that support for the war among Republicans has fallen from 73% to 62%, and just 30% are supporting sending troops into Iran. Many people read the fact that, you know, while the president was sort of trying to position himself as in a victorious place last night, that he really was keeping options open to still send troops into Iran at some point in that speech. And so I want to get a sense from you of A, what you think is most likely to come now, but then B, how that exact group of vulnerable voters who are so important to his coalition, whether he's really paying attention to them or not, how they're going to respond to all of this.
The foundation is falling apart under his feet, and especially among working class men, right? And folks that listen to the Manosphere, that listen to Joe Rogan, that listen to Sean Ryan, and especially among veterans. And what I hear most of all, and I talk with, to, and for independents especially, is that they're done. Enough. Done. And there's a big lie, which is no new wars, no forever wars, no regime change. And they heard it for years. He ran on it, and it's why many of them got behind him. Many of them were folks who had served in Vietnam, who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and thought he was going to keep his word. And among the Democrats especially, there was the big lie around the election. This is the big lie with his base, and it's really breaking people who came late, yes, but also aren't necessarily involved in politics. People like Sean Ryan and Joe Rogan are important because they get to UFC fans, they get to veterans who want to talk about guns and other stuff, and they're not always drilled in on politics, and they really trust and follow what these guys say. So when they say, I'm done, don't come knocking on my door anymore, it's very important. And going back to Epstein, there's two really important points. They want to see a perp walk. They want to see somebody in handcuffs held accountable. And until that happens, they're going to keep coming for him. And they also want to hear new solutions. Like, for example, how about a reward for someone who leaks the Epstein documents? Or a bounty, if you will. A billionaire could put out some money and say, hey, I'll give $10 million to whoever inside the administration leaks the documents. That might break the seal and get us what we really want.